In today's video, we're going to be talking all things strength training. My name's Devlin Eyden from coachparry.com, and we're going to dig into a little bit of information as to why strength training is important, how often you should be doing strength training, and the kind of things you should be including into your program to become a better runner. I'm going to hand over to Shona to get things started.
All right, to get us started, why is strength training so important for running? There's a number of reasons why. First one is that it helps prevent injuries, and we're going to dive into a lot more detail on that in just a little bit. The second reason why I believe that strength training is so important is that it actually delays the onset of fatigue come race day, essentially. So when you're racing, you will be able to sustain a harder effort for a much longer time. It's been shown in the literature over and over again, people doing strength training versus people who don't do strength training fatigue much later in a race. So that's the second aspect. And the third aspect is that it actually just makes you a better runner. So works on improving your running economy. So that's not necessarily your running gait. That is how efficient you are at utilizing different fuels. And it actually makes you a more efficient runner. So those are great benefits of strength training to your running performance. But when we're talking specifically about preventing injuries, this is where strength training becomes absolutely vital. Running is a compounding kind of sport. It's a hard sport and it's repetitive. And because of that, because of the nature of running, that repetitive nature of the compounding on your muscles and joints, we have to do something that protects our musculoskeletal structures around the joints to help prevent injuries. If we're preventing injuries, that allows us to stay consistent, which in turn will obviously improve your running performance over time. The body is also a chain, right? If there's something going wrong somewhere, in the body, if there's a weakness or an imbalance somewhere, that's a bit of a weak link, and that might refer in another aspect of the body. So if you have, a weakness in your glutes, as an example, you might be getting some knee pain, or if you have an imbalance or weakness in the foot, you might be getting a bit of hip pain. Because the body is a chain, it all sort of works together. And so with strength training, we want to ensure that we're making the body strong in specific areas so that we don't have that weak link somewhere in the body and we can be stronger for running.
One of the most common questions we get at coachparry.com is how often should I be doing strength training? There is a little bit of a difference depending on how old you are. So as you age, and particularly once you're over the age of 50, the literature is quite clear that you should be doing 3 strength training sessions per week. In the rest of the general population, you should be doing at least 2 strength training sessions per week. But at coachparry.com, we absolutely realize that running is part of our lives, and for most of us out there, it is a hobby, and therefore trying to fit in all the training we need to do for a specific event, plus doing all the strength training, plus looking after all of the other little bits and pieces, we realize that there's also a practical implication around how many strength training sessions we can do. So at Coach Parry, we have a little bit of a mantra that says 3 times a week is the ideal, 2 times a week is better than 1, and 1 is much better than none. And then also, just to follow up on that and how to fit it into your life, we aren't training specifically for an event year-round. And so when we go into kind of peak training phases and focusing on a specific event, we might do less strength training, so 1 to 2 sessions per week. And then as we come out of those strength training, out of those periods where we've been training for a specific event, we go into a more general preparation period, that's where we would focus more on strength training and then look to do 2 to 3 sessions of strength training during those periods.
We often get a lot of people saying they don't do strength training because they don't have access to a gym or they're not members at a gym. I'm going to put your mind at ease. You do not have to be in a gym in order to do strength or resistance training. You can get everything required from a strength point of view for runners in your own home. Using simple equipment like resistance bands, for example, whether they're mini looped bands or longer resistance bands, lightweight dumbbells, kettlebells often work, and then more often than not, things you've got lying around the house, using a chair, using broomsticks, using small steps if you're stepping up and down for different exercises. All of this can be done quite easily in your own home without you having to step foot into a gym.
So what do we need to be doing when we're talking strength training? Okay, Dev and Lindsey have touched on where and how often and you know, should we be doing this at home or in a gym? But what are the specifics around what is important for a runner doing strength training? It's very different to someone else or another sport doing strength training. So for running in particular, as I mentioned earlier, running is a repetitive, you know, sort of continuous movement. And so we want to ensure that we're working on the stabilizers of the body so that we are able to sustain the loads of running. We also want to work on the prime movers. So that is essentially the bigger muscle groups that move us for running. So that would be your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, and your calves, essentially, are your main kind of prime movers. So whenever we look at strength training and ensuring that we're doing the right thing for runners, we want to look at the prime movers along with the stabilizing muscles that work with those prime movers. So something to give you an example is that we'll do things like Bulgarian squats or single leg kind of squat movements, because that is working on a prime mover, so the hamstrings and the quads, but also a little bit of a stabilizing aspect there as well. A lot of the things that we like to do is sort of unilateral kind of exercises. So that's where there's something like a single leg squat or Bulgarian squat is a good example again, because when we look at running, essentially running is this aspect of continuously losing balance. You stand on one foot, you lose balance, and you move on to the other foot, if we can put it that way. And so very often unilateral kind of work is very, very important in what we do in strength training. Going back to this prime movers and stabilizers aspects, that happens in many different parts across the body. So if we're looking in the hip sort of structure, we want to be able to work on hip flexors, quads, hamstrings, but you also want to be working, those are your prime movers, you also want to be working on the stabilizers there. So that is your core, there's your internal and external obliques within the core, your glutes, the glute medius and glute min, which are really, really important for stabilizing the pelvis. And then if we move further down the chain, looking at the lower limb, for example, your prime movers there will be your calf muscle, so in particular something like the gastrocnemius, but we also really want to focus on the stabilizers there, which is your soleus, which is the thinner, more sort of lower part of the lower leg, and then even the smaller muscle groups there, something like posterior tibialis, all very fancy names, but that is the smaller muscle on the inside of the leg, where those are responsible for stabilizing your leg, and then you've got the movement for the prime mover, which is something like the calf muscle.
If you'd like to know what you should be doing specifically from a strength training point of view to improve your running, we have put together a free strength training program that you can check out on screen now. And if you would like something that does tie in really well with strength training, you can check out the video we've done on mobility training, which will help you and your running performance. If you got value out of this video and you enjoyed watching us, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss future content.